Defender. Just 1 second. So we'll get started. I'll show a few slides and then hopefully jump into a demo to show you exactly how the Microsoft 365 Defender suite can be used in your organization to hopefully stop attacks and reduce some of the operational workload in your organization in terms of being able to investigate and detect those incidents in your organization. Before we get started though, I just wanted to sort of start off with a couple of housekeeping rules. So please ensure that you are muted during the session. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat box. We'll hopefully get to a Q&A towards the end of the session, so we can try and answer the questions then. This seminar will be recorded and be made available to you on demand after the session. We'll also have a quick poll towards the end, if you don't mind, please answering that. And that's it for housekeeping. So let's get started, jump into the presentation. So before we get into the meat of Microsoft 365 Defender, I thought I'd just take a sort of step back to take you through Microsoft's approach to security all up. And so, generally for all of their solutions, they look at two core pillars. If you look in the center of the screen there, and that's using machine learning. So that's driven by their huge breadth of data and the trillions of signals that they get on a daily basis. And they leverage that intelligence to bring insights to your organization through the different tools they have available across the Microsoft 365 landscape and cloud infrastructure through Azure. And then also have people that are involved in that as well. So there's lots of threat experts and researchers that are kind of there to understand the macro environment and threats, the upcoming sort of malware detection and new threats that are out there in the landscape. And so they sort of help with those insights and reason over the data through some of the ML and AI that gets used in the service. That insight is then surfaced across two different capabilities. If you look at the top, Azure Sentinel. So I'm not going to go into too much detail around Sentinel. Hopefully you had time to attend the session earlier today, where my colleague was talking in more depth around Sentinel. But it's Microsoft Cloud Native theme. You can connect any sources of data into that solution. It's got pre-built connectors for all kinds of integrations with Microsoft 365. So across the Defender suite of products, as well as other third-party connectors. And then bring those events and alerts into the cloud-powered theme. And at the bottom we have Microsoft Defender. So that's sort of across both the modern workplace solutions like Microsoft 365, as well as across your infrastructure and cloud infrastructure in Azure and other clouds. So that's Microsoft extended detection and response capabilities. And that's sort of broken up into two suites. Microsoft 365 Defender, which we'll sort of be talking about in more detail today, as well as the Azure Defender solution. So kind of, building on the Azure Security Center, but helps to protect, SQL databases, your VMs, containers, and other solutions in Azure, as well as, being able to bring your on-prem infrastructure in there through things like Azure Arc, and then other cloud environments like AWS and GCP, for example. So that's Microsoft Defender, consisting of both the 365 Defender suite as well as Azure Defender. So let's look into Microsoft 365 Defender in a little bit more detail. It's made up of 4 different tools across Microsoft 365. So if we look to the far left, we start off with identities. And so that's Microsoft Defender for Identity to protect your on-premise resources, so through Active Directory. Formerly was called Azure ATP. So if you're not familiar with the Defender for Identity name, through that branding re-exercise, it's now Microsoft Defender for Identity. And then we have Microsoft Defender for Endpoint to protect your endpoints. That was formerly called Defender for Advanced Threat Protection, or Microsoft Defender ATP. And before that was Windows ATP. And then protecting your cloud apps, we have Microsoft Cloud App Security. And then lastly, towards the right, it is Microsoft Defender for Office 365. So protecting across vectors like email, but also can reach into things like SharePoint, OneDrive, and Teams. But we'll get into a bit more detail across those four different workloads as well. But what's happened, I guess, over the last couple of months is that instead of having to jump out into those separate tools to start your investigation, when something happens, so, for example, if you get an email in and there's some malicious code that starts to run on the endpoint, you may have to, start off in Defender for Office 365 portal and then jump across to the Defender for Endpoint portal. But now with the new unified approach, everything's available through the security.microsoft.com center. So, that will correlate all those alerts across the different detection sources and, create incidents based on those alerts. So one place now to go to start hunting across all of those. And then also, obviously, any sort of automatic remediation that happens, you'll be able to investigate and see what happened through that portal as well. So I think they've been doing a really good job of bringing it all together and hopefully making it a lot easier and quicker for you to be able to start your investigations and pick up any anomalous behaviors across the different detection sources. So let's have a look at Microsoft Defender for Endpoint. So this is Microsoft's endpoint protection capability. It's also come a long way over the years. Started off with just being able to onboard Windows endpoints, so Windows 10. They've also brought in now the capability to onboard devices like iOS, Android, Linux, Windows Server, and Mac OS. So being able to protect more endpoints in your environment. But there's also, besides the protection element with things like Next-Gen AV, the ability to have a look at threat and vulnerability management. So, because these endpoints all onboarded into the Defender for Endpoint service, it starts to understand which apps are installed on there. It can then, give you some information around if there's any vulnerabilities against the existing apps on those devices and what mitigations you can take to sort of reduce the risk in your organization, but also look at any types of misconfigurations perhaps that you've got against those devices. So if there's some recommendations that can be made, it will highlight those to you through threat and vulnerability management, and then also recommend some attack surface reduction rules that you can implement for mitigation. Also has the endpoint detection and response capability, so being able to pick up and detect any anomalous behaviors. So if it sort of gets through that first layer of protection through the Defender for AV capabilities, EDR will hopefully pick that up, start pushing alerts into Microsoft 365 Defender so that you can investigate. And then if you've got the automatic remediation capability set to that device group, it will then kick off investigation and hopefully remediate the threat before it actually can do any damage in your organization. And coupled with that, if you still need some assistance after going through the incidents and alerts, there's the Microsoft Threat Expert Service. So the ability to kind of reach out to, I guess, one of those threat experts to help you with your specific incidents in your organization. So that's like an add-on service that you can get for Defender for Endpoint to help you with your alerts and investigation. So that's Defender for Endpoint. Now, if we look across to user data with Microsoft Defender for Office 365. So as mentioned with this one, I guess most people primarily know this as the protection element for to protect against things like phishing and email protection, but also can extend across to, if you're starting to use Teams, safe attachments and safe links can extend into Teams, SharePoint, OneDrive as well. So protecting you across those collaboration workloads and not only from an email perspective. And so in there you can go and create your policies to set up and protect against phishing attacks. So when emails come in with malicious URLs, it'll wrap those. When a user clicks on it, it'll check it against malicious sites and hopefully prevent the user from clicking through to it. And same goes for attachments. Move those off to like a sandboxed environment, detonate them, see if there's any malicious code running on them. And then, if you look across, there's also the ability to start and kick off automatic investigation and remediation capabilities. So if, say, for example, the email got through, it was later detected as malicious. It can go in and have a look where else that email was potentially delivered to, and then use Microsoft's zero-hour auto-purge capabilities to extract those emails out of the other infected mailboxes, for example. There's also a awareness and training element to Defender for Office 365. So in there, you can use the attack simulation capabilities to create campaigns. I think there's something like over 100 payloads now that you can use to create your campaigns. And you can target those to specific users in your organization or to everybody. And it'll have reports back to show you who's clicked on. For example, if you send out a phishing campaign, you can see who clicked on the link, who entered their credentials, and it'll also show the end user where potentially there were indicators that they could have picked up on to prevent or stop them from clicking on those URLs, and then also provide some training that they would need to do. So hopefully they won't, click on those URLs or attachments again in the future. So some great new things happening in the awareness and training side of things as well. Next, we move on to identities. So this is the Defender for Identity solution. For this one, it helps you to detect when there's been a potential compromise in your organization, and then start to see that lateral movements across and privileged escalation happening. So this is done by dropping down sensors onto your DC. That gets reported back up into the Defender for Identity solution, and you can start to investigate users, have a look to see if there's any bad actors that have gotten into your organization. So sort of that post-breach capabilities there to protect your on-premise environment. And that connects in and integrates really tightly with things like Microsoft Cloud App Security and Azure AD Identity Protection to extend the same capability out into your Azure AD identity as well, and also to protect your cloud apps, not just on-premise. So tightly integrated there for investigation as well, and then obviously those all report back into Microsoft 365 Defender as that unified portal, so you can start hunting across those different sources. And then lastly, as part of the Microsoft 365 Defender solution is Microsoft Cloud App Security. So this one helps protect those cloud apps that you might be using, so the SaaS type solutions in your organization, and supports over 17,000 apps in the app catalog. You can also bring in any on-prem web apps that you may be using through things like Azure App Proxy and protect those as well. So there's lots of different scenarios that Microsoft Cloud App Security can help you with. So discovering cloud apps in your organization to prevent shadow IT. So being able to see which cloud apps your users have been browsing to. And then with integration with things like Microsoft Defender as well, you can either sanction or unsanction those apps. And if you, for example, unsanction an app, it can then write that indicator back to the Defender for Endpoint solution and block the user from being able to browse through to that cloud app again. So, if you pick up, for example, an app that you don't want users to go to anymore, or you see it's got a low compliance score, just unsanction it, and Defender for Endpoint will block users from being able to browse through. It also gives you the ability to upload proxy and firewall logs in, and has API connectors into some of those as well. So you could block users from browsing through that API connection as well. It also enables you to do real-time monitoring through the connected app experience. So that's the ability to sort of use conditional access. So when a user, for example, may be connecting from their own personal device, you may want to take them back through the reverse proxy and then block them from being able to download any content from SharePoint or OneDrive or any of those connected apps that you've connected in. So things like Salesforce, Dropbox, for example. And so restrict the type of access they have, and the ability to restrict them from doing things like cut, copy, and paste, or downloading sensitive info, uploading or printing. So lots of capabilities there. It also has the ability to detect anomalous behaviors in those cloud apps. So potentially you might see some alerts there from users doing mass downloads of SharePoint document libraries, for example. Or users coming in from anonymous IPs or Tor browsers will start to show up in alerts, and those alerts will also be pushed through into Defender, Microsoft 365 Defender, through the security.microsoft.com portal. And the last element here is the ability to use the file policies to protect information in those cloud apps. So certainly good integration here with the Microsoft information protection, with the sensitivity labels that you may already have created in the compliance center. And so you can leverage those labels to detect sensitive information, label content, create DLP policies to protect information in those cloud apps, whether it be the native Microsoft ones, or once again in some of those other cloud apps that you've connected in. And so how does that kind of all look across the attack chain? So if you look to the far left, we start with external threats. So Defender for Office 365, looking at email coming in, or hopefully prevent users from clicking on URLs, or if they do, block them from being able to browse through from them. But if it does get through, and we move across to the sort of exploitation of those devices and command and control, that's where Defender for Endpoint can come in and report those anomalous behaviors into the portal. And as the user starts to move laterally across and compromises user accounts, Defender for Identity will be able to pick up those anomalous behaviors and alerts, and also report up. And then from a sort of Azure AD perspective, identity protection is there to help, if there's sort of brute force account attacks, or a user that's logged in with stolen credentials, or there's been, your credentials have been leaked in the dark web somewhere, it'll highlight that to you as well. And then from a sort of exfiltration of data perspective, Cloud App Security will be able to pick up if there's been some forwarding rules placed on mailboxes that look suspicious, and hopefully prevent data exfiltration from happening in your organization. So kind of expands across the attack chain. There's also some capabilities on the compliance side of things that integrate nicely with the Microsoft 365 Defender suite. So capabilities like insider risk management can leverage the M365 Defender capabilities as well to pick up some of that anomalous behavior that's happening possibly from an internal perspective. But more on the compliance side of things, I think later today with one of our other sessions. So let's have a look at a quick scenario where we can see kind of how the integration between the different sort of solutions across the Microsoft 365 Defender or Microsoft 365 Defender suite work. So if we look at that user that gets that email, that could be personal email address that they open an attachment from, or they insert a USB. Malicious payload is then detected on that endpoint. So Microsoft Defender for Endpoints will pick that up, report it back to something like Intune, for example, if you have that up and running. So look at the compliance policies you have in there that can pick up machine risk score. And then if you have created conditional access policies in Azure AD, it will then change that machine risk score to block access into services in Office 365, for example. But then once Defender for Endpoints hopefully remediates that using the either automatic remediation capabilities, or a sort of human approves the remediation event, or gets rid of the malware on that infected device, it will then clear the alerts and open it up again and share that signal with the Microsoft Threat Intelligence capabilities, which will then look to the other services in the stack, so things like Microsoft Defender for Office 365, and if it sees a similar email or attachments throughout those mailboxes in your organization, will block those and hopefully prevent any further attacks in your organization. So we just pick off from where Microsoft Defender for Endpoint sort of picked up that initial alerts, and how that sort of suspension of access can work through things like conditional access. So MDE sees that alerts, the anomalous behavior is happening on the device, and while it sort of starts that investigation in the background, the machine risk score obviously gets reported to Intune. Intune then, due to the compliance policy that you've put in place there, will then report that device as non-compliant. And then so hopefully you've got a conditional access policy in your organization that will look at that compliance score and then block access if it's non-compliant into your SaaS apps. So, obviously all the Office 365 ones, but as well as some of the other SaaS apps that you may have connected into Azure AD. And then once remediation happens on that endpoint, it will then clear the machine risk score on that device. MD will then talk back to Intune. It'll become compliant again, and Intune will talk to Azure AD to clear out that risk score. And then the next time that user tries to access any of those SaaS apps or Office 365 again, it'll have access back into those services. So, during that compromise, while the machine is infected, access is blocked into those SaaS apps, but as soon as it's been remediated, it'll clear that risk score and then let users back in. So just a nice example of how they will kind of work together across the 365 Defender, as well as into things like Azure AD. So hopefully enough of slideware. But before I jump into a demo, just wanted to pop this slide in there to give you a kind of view, I guess, on what we're going to be trying to find when we jump into the demo. So similar to that, the attack kill chain that we saw earlier on, we'll kind of look for that initial access alerts and incidents through things like emails coming into the organization. We'll then move across, once we've identified that there's, possibly been a malicious email that's come through, and a user's called Barbara who's clicked on the link, that then fires off a weaponized document to run some PowerShell commands. Mimikatz kicks in, takes some credentials off that device, starts to then move across laterally to Eric's account, who's one of the help desk users, and then from there is able to jump across onto Robert's, get Robert's account details, start doing some more access and command and control and communication to things like the DC by dumping NTDS and being able to get the Active Directory services information, and then start doing some really bad things in your organization. So we'll look through the security center to hopefully find and show you what that all kind of looks like when you have Microsoft 365 Defender in place. So let's jump out of PowerPoint and have a look at Microsoft 365 Defender. So as mentioned, this is that new unified portal. So if you go into security.microsoft.com, you'll get into the homepage over here, and the homepage just gives you a quick overview on active incidents and alerts that you have, users that are at risk, some device compliance through things like Intune. So really a quick overview on what's going on in your organization. But most of the sort of investigation is going to happen through incidents and alerts. So if we jump into incidents, for example, we'll be able to see any active incidents or resolved incidents that are busy taking place. So you can see in here, I've got quite a few happening. This is a shared demo environment, so hopefully I'll be able to show you everything. Obviously there's lots of activity in here because it is a demo environment. So I've already got a couple of incidents that I found that hopefully will showcase most of the sort of techniques, I guess, that bad actors might use to try and get into your organization. But in the incidents page, you can have a look across those incidents. And an incident is really just a correlation of alerts to create an incident. So those alerts will be triggered off and fired off from those different services and detection sources. So across the Microsoft 365 Defender suite of products. So you'll see here which detection sources and those alerts that incident has been created from. So it gives you a nice sort of overview of how many active alerts are in that incident, which sources, when was the first activity, and you can then start to investigate. So rather than just jumping into the alerts page where you see a whole host of alerts and you're not sure which ones are sort of related to each other, an incident gets created automatically and becomes a lot easier for you to start your investigation. So being able to triage through similar alerts through an incident. So I found, if I jump into an incident that I've already got open here, you'll see that it has a look at different alerts and categories to create that incident, and that kind of positions it against the MITRE attack framework. So for this incident, we can see that it's we've got some alerts that are indicating there's some initial access happening in the organization. There's some execution, so I see some PowerShell commands being run. Nothing in terms of persistence or privileged escalation just yet, but if we move across, there's some defense evasion and credential access. So here you can start to see it's been able to gain access to credentials. They're starting to do some discovery in your organization. There's been lateral movement, and then starting to collect some information. I wasn't able to find a incident that had exfiltration as well as all of these, but I do have another incident that has some exfiltration activity. So we'll probably just jump into that so I can show you how you can see, those suspicious inbox forwarding rules and where they kind of pop up in those incidents as well. So if we look at the summary once again, you have the alerts and the categories down the right-hand side here, some, the scope of that, so which devices, which users are involved in this incident, and then any evidence that may have been found. But really, as you start to jump through across the different categories over here, you'll be able to get some more insight into what's going on. You can also jump into the graph section. So this gives you a nice sort of high-level view on sort of what's happened and how these alerts started to happen in your organization. So like a nice sort of graphical view here. You can also do things like play this attack story back. So kind of, through the timeline where it started. So through that malicious links going into different people's inboxes in your organization. So lots of emails sort of being targeted at different users. So you can have a look at it to see who's getting those. You can pause and play back if you want, but it's nice to just be able to run through what's going on. We can see here that a potentially malicious URL was clicked. There was some session SMB remuneration. A file was opened. There's some PowerShell runs through Word. There's IP and address reconnaissance. So really quickly just jumping through Mimikatz, and then just go through the rest, and hopefully towards the end you get a good view of the attack storyline over here. But if we move on then to investigations, so we could go through and have a look at all those individual alerts, but what happens is those alerts will often trigger off an investigation. So this automatically happens in the background. So specific events will trigger a investigation, and we can see under investigations here that there's been a few that have been triggered off. So this happens automatically in the background, but you can come in and then investigate. So hopefully most of the time these get remediated. You can dial back the remediation that happens here. So I guess in most cases the more automatic the remediation is, the less time it takes for it to be detected and stopped. But you can kind of be in the loop to this as well, so that if you need to then sort of permit any of these remediation actions from happening, you can jump in and quarantine the file manually, for example, by permitting that action from happening. But it's good to have full automation on these. So if we have a look at these investigations, start off with this one here. So I can see that a malicious file was detected based on an indication provided by Office 365. So this potentially came from an email. It got to the endpoint. So kind of slipped through, I guess, the Defender for Office 365, and then landed on the endpoints. There were some anomalous behaviors that happened, and then picked up that this was a malicious file, and then after the fact went in and changed the clicked URL verdict to malicious, and then would have removed it out of the mailbox and looked to see where else it may have been delivered and removed those as well. So we can jump onto one of these investigations just to have a little bit more detail around what happened. So in here you get a nice investigation graph. We can see this alert was received, a malicious file was detected. It started the investigation, started to analyze all the entities on that device. So the device being Barbara's PC, and then it remediated that file by quarantining it. So, hopefully we can see that the documents that kicked off, obviously, all the malicious PowerShell scripts that were run and started Mimikatz has at least been quarantined now. But we may want to see what else has happened as part of that. So we can look through the alerts here and see which alerts were related to this investigation. So in here it shows us that a suspicious URL was clicked, a malicious file was detected, and which devices were part of that, any evidence that was collected as part of that. So this is the actual file. We can click on that file, go and hunt to see, I guess, where else in that organization we might find that file. So you could, if you really want to get a quick view using the advanced hunting capabilities, can jump in and have a look to see where else that is. But we'll jump into hunting a little bit later. So a nice little overview there on a investigation, but let's jump back to our incidents. And back into investigations. So I just wanted to quickly jump into this one over here, because this shows us that there was a clicked URL, and after the fact was then changed back to a malicious URL was detected and then removed from the mailbox of that user. But I can have a look at what alerts trigger that off. So we can see here there was a potentially malicious URL, and I can get more details on that to see which mailboxes were impacted. So if there were others, I'd be able to see them in here as well. I can click into this alert to get a little bit more detail as well. And I can see what happened. So it gives me a little alert story. And so here it shows that we have detected one of your users recently clicked on a link. I can have a look at that message. And so this kind of integrates with the Threat Explorer capabilities built into Defender for Office 365 to give me more insights into that email. And I can open that in Explorer as well. So that'll load it up for me, and I can start to sort of see, some more information around that email that came in with a malicious link. So hopefully that'll load up. It'll just give me a timeline view on, what happened with that email when it came in. We can jump across into analysis. So this will give me some more information around where that email was delivered to, who was the sender name. So it looked like a recipient that came from within my organization. So Alex Wilbur is a user that I'm aware of, but the domain name is different. So obviously trying to impersonate Alex. I can see there was one attachment, a couple of URLs there, but I can sort of drill into what those attachments were and which URLs were detected in that email as well, and then go and look at where there were similar emails across the organization as well. So that's leveraging the Threats Explorer capabilities built into Defender for Office 365. Let me just go back to that incident. And go back to incidents again. So we figured out that there was an email that came in. There was potentially a malicious URL that was clicked that then downloaded a file, which then executed on that endpoint that was picked up by Defender for Endpoints. So we can start to have a look at, sorry, just going to go back out of this one. And find that, sorry, somebody's changed my view. Let's have a look at resolved. I can apply that. And that was this incident here. And so if we go back to our investigations, we've had a look at the email that came in, and we know that something bad happened there. And then, we can start to see what else is going on that, based off that email and the attachment and weaponized payload that was launched. So we see there's some other malware being detected. Mimikatz credential theft tool was run, and that's, I guess, where they, start to do some reconnaissance in the organization. There's been some user IP address recon, and they're suspected over the hash attack. So that's where they're, sort of moving naturally in the organization, getting credentials from other privileged users to then start exfiltrating data in the organization. So, you can jump into all these investigations and do some more investigation. You can also have a look at the evidence across all of those alerts that have been correlated into the single incident. So this is a great place to go to have a look at, maybe all the emails that were included as part of this incident. So, this is obviously been gathering that information of the devices and the users, all the files that were sort of suspicious as part of those alerts and incidents, any processes, IP address and URLs as well. So you can certainly jump into one of these and get some more detail about any of the evidence that's collected. So you may want to just have a look at, for example, that file or any of the files that were remediated or not remediated for whatever reason. And then from there, you can go and do things like, well, I want to go and hunt. And so that will jump out and take you into the advanced hunting capabilities, but sort of preloaded with the hash for that file and the file name. So you can then easily find that same file across the organization. So it'll quickly load that up. I can see for now, it's just sort of been restricted to Barbara's PC. So hopefully the impact is still isolated to her device, but a great place to go and have a look for more. Can't get to my other incidents. So I'll close that one out. I can also then, let's have a look at which other devices are part of this incident. So this is where I can start to see a picture around, so obviously we know Barbara's PC was the initial sort of device that got hit with that email. But then there was some lateral movement that happened potentially across to Robert's and then onto our domain controller. And so I can jump into any of these devices to get a little bit more information. That'll take me into the inventory. I can see the risk level, and so this is that same risk level that gets reported back to Intune to be leveraged in things like conditional access and block users from being given access. But I can also quickly see from this that obviously Barbara is the most frequent user, but Eric's also logged into this, but less frequently. So I might want to do some investigation around why that's happened. I can also do things like isolate this device. So I know that something's happened, and maybe while I'm still doing my investigation, I want to isolate it. So I can, also do things like allow Outlook and Teams to still continue to work on that device while I'm doing my investigation, but it'll block any other access to the network. So depending on what you want to do here, you might decide you just want to block all access to the network, or just allow Outlook and Teams to still run in the background while you're doing your investigation. You can also do things like restrict app execution, run an AV scan, collect some information, do a live response session. So that sort of connects through a PowerShell screen to be able to, then look at what processes are currently running on that machine, and get some more information off it if need be. So lots you can do from a device perspective. We can also go back and have a look at the users that were involved. So if we look in here, obviously the main user we're kind of looking at the moment is Barbara. So we can have a look at her account profile. And in here, we can see some more information about Barbara. Her current investigation priority is not high, and that's because, as mentioned, I mean, a lot of the alerts associated now towards Barbara have been resolved already in this for this specific incident. But generally, if it was a new incident with lots of alerts, this investigation priority score would be quite high. But I can also go in and see which active alerts are against Barbara. I can go to her user page to do some more investigation around and pivot on her identity to see, what else has been happening against her identity. And then also, have a look at what lateral movement paths have been happening. So, Barbara, if I have a look here, she was Eric Grubbles has been logged into her device as well. So that's where we kind of saw that on her device as well. So we know they started to have some lateral movement across in the organization as well. And if we go back to that incident and move across to mailboxes, this is where we can see, as part of all the alerts that were correlated in this incident, which mailboxes may have received that same malicious URL as well, and the display name of them. So just, some more information piecing together this attack in your organization. But if we click back to alerts, for example, just wanted to show you, if you did decide you wanted to sort of dive into more of the detail to have a look at each of those individual alerts, you can see when I look at alerts here, that there was a number of different malicious links being delivered to those mailboxes. And so I can jump into one of those to have a little bit more detail. I can see that here's where the potential URL was clicked. And, across the line here, I can also get some more information, or I can dive into any of these alerts. But you can start to get that picture happening if we scroll down through these alerts, where we see the different attack techniques across that multi-attack framework happening in your organization. So, lots to explore, I guess. Still, you had to find out what's going on in the organization. But a lot of this will kind of be automatically remediated through the capabilities built into Defender for Office 365. Here we can see there's some command line used for possible over the hash, over the pass hash. And this is, if we click into the alert, you can see which of the entities that were recognized as part of this. This is part of a chain event detection. So we can see which other alerts kind of correlates with that, and we see there's a suspected over the hash attack and command line used for possible over past the hash attacks. But we can go into more detail. So lots of information once again here. You can manage an alert, assign to somebody, close, resolve the alerts, all through this. So hopefully, you're starting to get that picture in a little bit more detail, and and you can take action to remediate any incidents that happen in your organization. There's also other capabilities that you can have a look through as part of the Microsoft 365 Defender suite of products. So if we move out of incidents and alerts, as mentioned, you might want to go in and do some advanced hunting. The nice thing about this is there's lots of obviously entities that you can hunt across. So all the different ones as part of your Microsoft 365 Defender suite of products, so across apps and identities, email, devices, and you can create your queries to look across all these different sources. You can also do things like create custom detection rules. So for example, we've got one here that's been created to look for any emails that come from external with an attachment that then led to logon and possibly a download from a SharePoint repository, for example. So you can create that attack, that custom detection rule to then send out alerts based on that specific activity that you might have gotten through an advanced hunting query, for example. And that advanced hunting query would looks something like this. It's all done through KQL or Custo query language. and we can run this. I don't think there's anything in the last 30 days for the specific event, but I could run that query to have a look quickly. And nothing was found for the specific query that I've looked into, but I could try extend it across more days and see if there's anything else that I want to pick up there. There's also lots of queries from the community that are quite useful to have a look at across discovery. Things like if you're looking for a specific URL, potentially you can use one that's already been made by somebody in the community rather than trying to redo it, and just put in your URL that you're looking for over here and run the query. And it'll find any devices that have clicked through to that URL, for example. Action Center, this is where if you do have any pending actions that are required, so if it's not fully automated, you can then go in here and approve any pending actions. But any ones that are taken care of automatically, you'll also be able to see in the history. So here we can see when a file's been quarantined, for example. I can open that to investigate a little bit more. I can undo that quarantine if I need to as well. So good place to go and sort of review any of those activities that might happen through automation, and maybe I just want to go in and investigate a little bit further or undo it. Maybe it was a false positive, for example. So that's Action Center. Next, we'll look at threat analytics. So this is a great place to kind of jump into to have a look at what are the latest threats. So not necessarily ones in your organization, but across the globe. What are some of those high impact threats? And then if it's detected any of these specific threats in your organization, it will show you if you have any impacted assets across these. So you can quickly scroll through and have a look. But there's lots of sort of information. So if we click on one of these threats, for example, let's have a look at this one. It gives you more information about the threats. If there's any devices in your organization that may be impacted by this threat, you can also have a look at the analyst report. So lots of information in here, and this is kind of ever growing report, so they'll add more and more information. They have a change log, so any sort of detail that gets updated or known mitigations that can be taken to prevent this from happening in your organization, they'll list it in here. You can see if there's any related incidents, impacted assets, and a list of mitigations that you can take to prevent your organization from being vulnerable to this specific threat. So very useful to go and have a look in here. If there's something that's trending and you want to make sure you protect it against it, have a look in here and it'll give you some information on how to protect against those threats. And that kind of then leads down to the vulnerability management piece here, where it looks at those known vulnerabilities. It can then also look at which apps have been installed on your devices and tell you what those threats are currently against those apps. So maybe you've got outdated OS builds, you've got outdated apps, and you can see what known vulnerabilities are associated to those and how to remediate against them so that your risk score, exposure score can come down and hopefully, be less at risk to those threats. And so those recommendations can be quickly triaged through here. And from these recommendations, you can click on any of these to get a bit more information. And so if it's something like maybe a configuration or an attack surface rule that would help with the mitigation of this, it'll tell you what the user impact would be. So if you turned on this specific attack surface reduction rule, there'd be can be safely set on 5 devices, so 83% of assets in the organization without any issues. So you could then open a remediation option for this specific vulnerability, and I can then jump into here and say, well, I want to open a ticket in Microsoft Endpoint Manager, for example, to then create that ASR rule and push it to those 5 devices, set a date. I can track that remediation, but then whoever looks after Endpoint Manager will see that under Microsoft Endpoint Manager or Intune, and then can take action to implement those attack surface reduction rules. And then you can track your remediation in here as well. So it sort of shows you how many devices have been remediated against that specific recommendation. Software inventory will just give you a view of all software in your organization. It's kind of like an ongoing thing. So as you start to remediate, update the apps and there's less vulnerabilities, you'll see that sort of exposure change in your organization. And if we move down, you'll see how the rest of the sort of Microsoft 365 Defender suite of products kind of fall in line into the same security.microsoft.com center. Things like being able to look at attack simulation training, Threat Explorer, but mostly all pivoted through incidents and alerts. At the top here is where you're going to go to start to investigate any sort of incidents that are happening in your organization. So I think that's a quick whirlwind tour around Microsoft 365 Defender. There's certainly lots of capabilities available in here. I think just one piece we didn't really touch on quickly was the web protection piece to Defender for Endpoints. So there's, I mentioned, I think, earlier on that you can also, there's web protection capabilities, so you can create policies to protect against specific users clicking on specific categories in websites. So high bandwidth, leisure, adult content. So you can create those web content filtering policies and then apply those to those devices so that users will be blocked from being able to browse through them. And then you get the reports in here that you can go and investigate and see which URLs have been accessed, for example, or been blocked. That's about it. Thank you very much for your time. We'll go back to the poll now, I think. Andrew, do we have a poll question that needs to pop up? Thank you. So hopefully you'll have a poll popping up on your screen. If you don't mind quickly responding to that poll, and then we'll try and take some questions in the last couple of minutes if there are any. Okay, I think that's probably enough time for the poll. Let's see if there are any questions we can quickly take. We've got a couple of minutes. So what Azure roles do you need to use the different Defender apps? So there's built-in. So for example, I'm logged in as a global reader, so security global reader. There's a couple of different Azure AD roles that you can leverage, and I think you can also go into permissions and roles in here to list out those different roles that you can apply to users. So if you just want a SOC analyst to be able to go in and view the incidents and alerts, but not be able to create any new policies or make any changes, or you might want to add them as just a security reader role, global security reader. But you can manage roles in here to, and you can also then pivot those across different device groups that you create as well. So you may have different security ops guys that look after different sets of devices, and so you might want to segregate them from being able to only view incidents and alerts across their specific devices, and you can create device groups and then assign users to roles that are specific to those device groups as well. So yeah, so is there an audit only mode for web content filtering? I mean, yes, you can certainly just go into the reports to have a look at and see which URLs are being clicked on. So you don't have to implement a web protection policy, for example. You can go into the reports and it'll show you which users are clicked into which categories without actually blocking users from being able to do that. So certainly you can sort of just, before you turn it on to block users, you can have a look to see which URLs have been accessed by users, which domains, and get more detail around that in your organization. So don't have to go straight to blocking users if you don't need to. What is the pricing model? So there's different ways to license the Microsoft 365 Defender suite of products. Obviously, you can go full in with Microsoft 365 E5, which will give you everything. But there's also security add-ons to things like Microsoft 365 E3. You can also purchase the different individual elements separately. So you can buy Defender for Endpoint on its own, or Defender for Identity on its own. So lots of different ways to slice and dice. I think, if you want some help costing that up and finding the right pricing model, please do reach out to your Byte account manager, and they'll be able to happily advise you on the best way to do that. I think that's about all we have time for. Thank you for your time this afternoon, and I know there's another session on later today, so look out for that one as well. As mentioned, this will be made available after the session, so thanks again for taking the time.